On Tuesday, the 6th of February, just 3 weeks ago, a 30-year-old man named Kwashawn Hart checked himself into the ECMC Medical Center in Buffalo, New York, after experiencing a bad reaction to some cannabis he had used earlier that day. However, after being discharged from the hospital 3 hours later, he would mysteriously disappear. According to his father, Charles Hart, Kwashawn would eventually make a phone call at around 10:30 a.m. to inform him of the situation, but harrowingly, this would be the last time Charles would hear his son's voice. So, rightfully concerned, around a day or so later, Charles once again reached out to Kwashawn to check up on him, but to his surprise, the response would be extremely troubling, to say the least. Charles was simply told to relax and was reminded that Kwashawn was a grown man. However, after 3 weeks of investigating, it would appear that this grown man is still nowhere to be seen. But to make matters even worse, this is not the first time an incident like this has occurred, as in just the last 3 months, there have also been 2 other cases of young black men being discharged from hospitals, never to be seen or heard from again. So, with this in mind, many are starting to wonder, could these cases be connected? And if so, what could be the sinister reason behind their sudden disappearances? Kwashawn Hart was born on the 16th of March in 1993 to his late mother and loving father, Charles Hart Sr., in the city of Buffalo, New York, alongside his sisters. Little is known about his early years, but what we do know is that at some point during his life, Kwashawn would unfortunately lose his mother, which understandably took a huge toll on his mental health. However, despite his struggles, Kwashawn was still an incredibly caring person who was always there for his friends and family, especially his father Charles, as even in his adult years, Kwashawn would refer to his father as his best friend, choosing to spend most of his free time at the family home. According to Charles, Kwashawn was also an extremely creative person, with the ability to play both the flute and guitar to a professional standard, alongside his passion for the visual arts, where he mostly focused on painting. Kwashawn would also go on to hold down multiple jobs throughout the years, with his most recent position being with Buffalo Transportation, which is a non-emergency medical transportation service that takes vulnerable people to and from the hospital. However, despite Kwashawn's hard-working nature, it would appear that for reasons unknown, he would eventually leave this position in search of something new. But as the weeks went by, there didn't seem to be a new job in sight, as the now 30-year-old man was choosing to spend most of his time on hobbies as opposed to career searching. It would also appear that his substance use would slowly start to increase during this period, with the 30-year-old man eventually needing to check himself into a hospital after he started hallucinating in response to smoking cannabis that day. But what appeared to be just a simple case of an overuse of substances would soon develop into something much more disturbing, as after that fateful day in February, Kwashawn was never seen again. On Monday the 5th of February, the young man was spending his day like any other, but as the day soon turned to night, Kwashawn would choose to stay awake into the early hours of Tuesday morning. It is unknown where he was at the time or who he was with, but after smoking a joint of what was supposed to be cannabis, Kwashawn would start to suffer from some strange side effects which would cause him to begin hallucinating. At first, he tried to ride out the uneasy feeling, as moments of paranoia are a relatively common side effect of cannabis. However, these concerning symptoms would only seem to grow with time, eventually causing Kwashawn to start panicking. So, given the developing situation, he then decided he had no other option than to call 911 to report the incident and to seek help from a medical professional. At this point, it is unknown how he got to the hospital, whether it was by ambulance or by a friend, but either way, at approximately 4:30 a.m, Kwashawn was brought over to the ECMC Medical Center, where he was then treated by the doctors. This appointment then lasted around 3 hours before the medical professionals felt Kwashawn was ready to be discharged, and so at 7:30 a.m, the troubled young man was captured on surveillance cameras leaving the facility. Later that morning, he then pulled out his phone and called his father Charles to let him know what had just happened, around 3 hours after being discharged, and according to Kwashawn, the cannabis he had smoked that night was unusually strong, and had caused him to hallucinate in a way he had never experienced before. But after explaining that he had called 911 and checked himself into a hospital, Charles was relieved to hear that the doctors felt he was well enough to be discharged, and the conversation ended shortly after, with Kwashawn promising his father that he would be more careful in the future. However, little did Charles know in that moment that this would be the last time he would ever hear his son's voice. On Thursday the 8th of February, around 2 days after Kwashawn had been discharged from the hospital, his father Charles began to get concerned when he realised that his son had failed to stop by as expected. So, given the fact that he hadn't spoken to Kwashawn since the incident, he decided to reach out via text message to check up on his son's well-being, but it would seem that getting a response would take longer than anticipated. At first, Charles sent a message at 12:51 AM asking Kwashawn to come home, but when he didn't respond in the first 18 minutes, he followed up with another message reading, "I want my son here with me." However, once again, it would appear Kwashawn was ignoring the messages, or at least not looking at his phone, as another 8 minutes would soon go by with still no response from the troubled young man. So, with growing concern, Charles then reached out a third and final time in a desperate attempt to get some reassurance, explaining to Kwashawn that he knew he was in Buffalo and just wanted him to quickly swing by the house to confirm he was safe. But just as before, it would seem Kwashawn was unable to respond, as hours would then go by with the text messages continuing to go unseen, and Charles was beginning to worry his son may be in serious danger. However, to his surprise, in the early hours of Thursday morning at 5:31 AM, Charles would finally receive a response from his son, simply reading, "I'm a grown man, Dad, chill," to which Charles was both relieved and frustrated, as although it was likely that his son was safe and alive, he still wanted to see his face in order to 100% confirm that this was the case. So once again, he asked Kwashawn to come back to the house, hoping it wouldn't be too much longer before this turmoil would be over. However, despite this rather positive update in the situation, it wouldn't be long before Charles's worst nightmare would soon come to life, as not only would his son fail to return home, but he would also fail to contact any of his family or friends for weeks, eventually leaving Charles with no other option than to officially report his son as missing. On Friday the 9th of February, the Buffalo Police Department would receive a phone call from Charles Hart, who was claiming that his son could potentially be in danger as he'd been acting very strange. He also explained that Kwashawn had recently experienced an episode of hallucination and that he wasn't responding to his text messages from any friends or family, which was extremely unlike his son. So, with this information, the police promised to look into the matter as they agreed the details were concerning. However, given that Kwashawn was a 30-year-old man that had only been missing for a few days, they felt raising any alarms would be a bit premature, and asked Charles to be patient and wait for his son to make contact. But as the days went by, Kwashawn would continue to remain silent, as every single text message and missed call from his friends and family would go unanswered, with Charles only growing more concerned as time ticked by. So, with the situation only increasing in danger, Kwashawn's family then attempted to contact the Buffalo Police Department again to update them on the case and to see if they could get some officers to help in their search. But to everyone's surprise, the response they would soon receive would send shockwaves throughout the local community. On Wednesday the 14th of February, one of Kwashawn's sisters would post on Facebook that the family had been contacted by the Buffalo PD to explain that they would not be willing to aid in the search for Kwashawn Hart, as according to his sister, the situation did not appear to be serious enough for them to open an investigation. So, given this incredibly bad news, the family then took to social media to further share the story and to ask anybody in the area to keep an eye out for the missing young man. They also pleaded with the public to help spread the news and to call them directly if anybody saw him, as the police had already denounced any interest in the case, and so it was left up to the family to find Kwashawn. They then took to the streets with flyers displaying the details of the case alongside a recent picture of Kwashawn, in the hopes that by spreading his image, somebody would recognize the face and eventually call in a useful tip. However, despite numerous calls and unofficial sightings, the family would continue to have no luck in finding their missing loved one, and so were once again forced to start looking for new ways to share the story. But to their relief, it wouldn't be too much longer before the family would receive a call that could potentially change everything. On Friday the 23rd of February, Charles Hart would make a post on his Facebook page explaining that he had just been interviewed by a news reporter named Claudine Ewing from Channel 2 News, as they had taken an interest in the case given its concerning details. During this interview, Charles provided most of the case details, stating that his son had been behaving strange ever since his hallucinating incident with the cannabis, but that he hadn't been able to get in touch with him for over 2 weeks. The broadcasted interview didn't appear to last very long, only running for around 1 minute, but with this huge platform picking up the story for the first time, Kwashawn's family felt like they were finally making some progress in the case, and so, with their spirits now high, they awaited the positive news. However, after 3 days and several possible tips from the public, it would appear that Kwashawn still remains missing to this day, with no concrete proof confirming his safety, which has understandably left his family even more desperate for answers. Now, unfortunately, as far as the official investigation goes, this is all we know for now. But despite the lack of leads, Charles still remains hopeful that his son will eventually turn up one day, as although Kwashawn's behaviour has been extremely out of the ordinary, Charles wants to remain positive that it will only be a matter of time before his son returns home. However, with Kwashawn being missing now for over 3 weeks, alongside the incredibly worrying circumstances that surround his disappearance, the likelihood of his safe return is only growing weaker as the days pass. So with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. Now, as I normally do in these videos, I would like to start by looking at some of the more optimistic explanations behind Kwashawn's sudden disappearance, as although there are many red flags in his case, there is still every chance he could still be out there somewhere. But if this is the case, where could Kwashawn have been all this time? And how has nobody been able to see him in over 3 weeks? Well, to answer the first question, I feel it would be useful to go back to the start of this story, as although we know Kwashawn had an adverse reaction to the cannabis he smoked that night, we still don't know how he got to the hospital or who he was with at the time. Now, given that he claimed to have called 911 that night, it would make sense that an ambulance would have been dispatched to pick him up. However, at this time I cannot confirm if this is true. But even if it was, perhaps a more important point to uncover would be to understand who he was with, as this may help explain why he had such a strange reaction to something he did almost every day. Could the cannabis have been laced with something perhaps? The drug is legal in New York, so it's not like he would have needed to buy it from a dealer. However, what if he was smoking a joint that a friend could have rolled for him? Perhaps this friend even knew what he was doing, or maybe they didn't. But either way, if there is a potential suspect connected to this incident, surely it's a lead worth investigating. After all, this person could be the very same person who Kwashawn has been hiding out with for the past 3 weeks. So if we can trace a name from that night, it may lead us to uncovering the truth. But for argument's sake, let's say Kwashawn was actually alone that night, and simply smoked too much or purchased some cannabis that was stronger than he was used to, thereby causing this strange hallucinogenic reaction. But even so, why would he fail to get in touch with any of his family members or friends for so long? This wasn't typical behaviour of Kwashawn at the time, and he was usually somebody who stayed in close contact with his father almost every day. So to simply vanish in the way he has would be a massive red flag to any family. However, one point to consider is what if Kwashawn had simply had enough of his life and wanted to get away for a few weeks to recharge his batteries? Based on the text exchange between his father, it did seem like he may have felt slightly overwhelmed by the relationship he shared with his family, and maybe he wanted to regain some independence for a little while, unaware of just how much of an impact his absence would have. With this in mind, maybe he will see this recent news broadcast and immediately realise the worry he's caused and return home right away. After all, the video's only been out for around 3 days, so it could just be a matter of time before he sees it. In fact, to add to this train of thought, earlier this month, another young man who goes by the name of Delano Ray was reported missing by his family in January of this year, and at first, things really did look bleak. But after around a month of searching, it wasn't too long ago that he was finally confirmed to be alive, after seeing his face on the news and contacting his mother to confirm his safety. So perhaps Kwashawn's story could have a similar ending. But to play devil's advocate, although I truly pray there is a happy conclusion to this case, I can't help but wonder, what if there is something more sinister at play here? Now, at the start of this video, you may remember that I mentioned a chilling connection between Kwashawn's case and a number of other potential victims who share a very similar story but after months of searching have still not been found. The common thread in these cases is the fact that they all attended the hospital shortly before going missing, and they were all discharged despite suffering some fairly serious symptoms. Now, if you're familiar with my channel, then I'm sure you will already be aware of the cases of Evonte McNeill and Tvontae Hart. If not, then I highly recommend checking out the videos on screen now, as I go into a lot more detail and I'm sure you will be able to identify even more similarities in their cases that I haven't mentioned here. But either way, just for the sake of context, I will quickly provide a brief rundown of their stories. So, starting with Evonte McNeill. In November of last year, the 25-year-old man would check himself into a mental health hospital in North Carolina after suffering from an episode of paranoia. But after being seen by a doctor and being successfully discharged, he would return later that day complaining that these feelings of paranoia had still not disappeared. But despite checking himself into the hospital for a second time that day, he was once again discharged by the medical professionals and left to walk the streets alone. So, it was no surprise that later that day, Evonte was still feeling paranoid despite being allowed to leave the hospital. And so, under the direction of his mother, he then decided to head over to the Fayetteville police station to inform them of the situation. The police called an ambulance to pick him up, but before the medical team could arrive on the scene, the young man had seemingly vanished into thin air, never to be seen again. Evonte's mother, Tiana Melvin, would then file a missing persons report the next day with the county sheriff's department. However, it wasn't long before the alert was abruptly cancelled for an unexplained reason. Now, based on the details I just ran through, hopefully you can already start to see the parallels in Evonte and Kwashawn's stories. From the fact that they both suffered from feelings of paranoia and hallucination, they both sought medical help before their disappearance, and even more chillingly, it would seem that their cases were both pretty much refused by the local police departments, which, considering the details surrounding their stories, raises many controversial questions. However, before I start attempting to answer those questions, I would first like to speak for a moment on the very recent disappearance of Tvontae Hart, as his story also follows a very similar pattern. So, on Thursday the 1st of February, just a few days before Kwashawn went missing, a 19-year-old college student named Tvontae Hart had apparently suffered a mental breakdown earlier that day and had been hospitalized for 3 hours. Since this case was first reported on, there have also been conflicting stories to say he was actually taking drugs at the time that were given to him by a friend, but this has not been officially confirmed by the police. Nevertheless, the one thing that is for certain is that Tvontae spent 3 hours in the hospital that day to be treated for whatever it was he was suffering from, which coincidentally is the exact same amount of time as Kwashawn. However, after being successfully discharged from the facility, he would eventually arrive at a local bus station where he was captured on surveillance cameras attempting to open the front door to the building, but as it was closed at the time, Tvontae instead decided to walk away, and hasn't been seen since. He was supposed to be travelling to his grandma's house to recuperate after his mental episode, so when he didn't show up, his family reported him missing right away. So I think you will probably agree that the details in this case are also quite harrowingly similar to Kwashawn's story, as just like with Evonte McNeill, both men were hospitalised for mental episodes shortly before their disappearance. Both men went missing in February and share a striking physical resemblance. Plus, both men were usually in constant contact with their family, but for whatever reason have failed to get in touch for weeks. Now, I think the case details speak for themselves, but if there is a connection here, what could that possibly mean? Are these just young men that have come from similar backgrounds that are simply suffering from their own bad decisions? Or could there perhaps be another reason behind these disturbing similarities in their cases that is far more sinister in nature? Well, a potential theory which I've mentioned several times on this channel now is the diabolical practice of organ harvesting, where disturbing individuals will remove the organs of a healthy young man in order to sell them for a huge payout. Now, there are no official statistics for how often this practice occurs in the United States, so it's difficult to say for certain just how prevalent cases of organ harvesting actually are. However, with the rising number of individuals that have been going missing as of late, I would personally say that there are probably a lot of cases that have gone unnoticed, whether that be due to a lack of investigation or victims being carefully chosen where people wouldn't notice their absence. But before I get too carried away here, I feel it must be said that in many cases, the true conclusion behind these disappearances is usually something a little more plausible. So we have to be careful when mentioning theories like organ harvesting, as without any hard evidence, it really is impossible to say. I'm sure there is probably an argument to be made that after attending these hospitals, any one of these potential victims, whether that be Kwashawn, Tamontes or Evonte, could have taken a blood test or provided some medical information during their visit that may have triggered an attack of sorts, so a notorious group could then gain access to their valuable organs or blood. But as I say these words, I really do feel like I have to stress just how much of a stretch this would be. Now, I'm not saying it's implausible, because organ harvesting is a very real thing and it is surely something that does happen from time to time in America. But I want to be careful with what I say, as at the end of the day, the main goal of these videos is to raise awareness and to discuss realistic theories which may help with the investigation. So with this in mind, perhaps our time would be better spent discussing a different issue that plagues the United States right now, which, unlike organ harvesting, is undoubtedly relevant to these stories, which in my opinion would be the malpractice that goes on inside America's medical industry. Now, just before I get into this, let me just state for the record that I am far from an expert when it comes to these matters, especially as I am clearly not native to the US. But one thing I have learned after listening to countless videos and podcasts is that the medical industry in America is first and foremost a business. And so this means that when patients are in need of medical attention and cannot afford the necessary treatment, in most cases, these people are shown the door, which to me, as an outsider, seems incredibly unfair. Now, I cannot say for certain why Kwashawn was discharged so early despite the issues he was suffering from, but given that he would disappear shortly after and hasn't spoken to his family since, tells me that regardless of where he is, Kwashawn was, and likely still is, going through something right now, and so in my opinion, I think the hospital may have failed him that day. I suppose it's possible that Kwashawn was the one who pushed for this early discharge, but unfortunately this is something I don't think we will ever know for sure, as it would always just be one word against the other. But either way, given that this is an extremely suspicious event which has occurred not just to Kwashawn, Tamontes and Evonte, but also countless others across the country, surely there should be more attention being given to the mental health of these young men in America, as it seems that more and more of them are going missing every day for one reason or another, despite our vast improvements in technology and massive strides in medical industry knowledge. Now, to be honest, there isn't really much more to say on the topic, and I want to be mindful that we don't stray too far from the issue at hand, which is of course the fact that a 30-year-old man has been missing now for 3 weeks, with not one single official sighting to date. So please share this story with as many people as you can, and spread the image of Kwashawn, as I know it would mean the world to his family that so many of you are helping in the search, especially after the fact that the local police seemed to have failed them. Also, if you are from the Buffalo area and potentially have any information that may assist in the case, please contact Charles Hart or Kwashawn's sister Kiara on Facebook, and from there you will be able to access their direct phone numbers if necessary. I will leave all links in the description below. Anyway, with that, I think I'll leave this video here. But if you have any theories of your own which you think may explain what happened to Kwashawn Hart, please leave your ideas in the comments down below and I will do my best to get back to you. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for updates on these stories. Also, if you would like to hear more about some of the other cases that I featured in this video, such as Kwashawn Hart, Evonte McNeill, or even Delano Ray, feel free to check out the videos on screen now.